All right, so now that we're out on the road in the Genesis G90, I want to start out by pointing out how silent this car is. It's just really quiet in here. It shouldn't really need saying at this point, but the car behind me is not a Hyundai. It is a Genesis, just like how Lexus branched off from Toyota into its own bespoke luxury brand. The Genesis brand is now off building its own models completely separate of Hyundai. We've got a full lineup of cars from the G70, G80, and this, the flagship G90. They've also got a GV80 SUV on the way. That's going to be a big one. Now, the G90 was just given a complete facelift for 2020. It's not an all-new model underneath, but you couldn't tell that by looking at it. Out front, we have this new shield style grille. I think looks absolutely fantastic. Some people might say it's a little too big, but in terms of big grills, I think I like Genesis's design more than I like Lexus's. We've got this Portos red paint. Looks really interesting. It looks kind of burgundy right now, but in certain lights, it actually looks purple. Now, we've got these 19-inch wheels. Those are going to be polarizing. I ran a poll on Instagram, seemed like it was about 50-50, maybe a little bit in favor of liking these wheels. You might like them. I happen to absolutely love them. I think they remind me a lot of BMWs from the 90s, the E39s, E38s, those types of wheels. Now, seeing it on a modern car is a bit different, but I happen to think I think bravo to Genesis for going bold and doing something that's different than every other car, because people keep saying all of these modern cars look alike. Well, not this one. I've already been asked twice about the Bentley that I'm driving, so that just goes to show what other people seem to think about it. In the back, we have this new connected taillight design that runs all the way across the length of the car. That's pretty interesting as well, and we're going to start to see this new headlight and taillight language start to appear on all of Genesis's models. This sort of split light design with lining down the middle that sort of separates it. So yes, this G90 is going to preview what a lot of the company's future models are going to look like. But now that we've gone over the exterior and what's new on the outside of the G90, let's go ahead and get it out on the road. All right, so now that we're out on the road in the Genesis G90, I want to start out by pointing out how silent this car is. It's just really quiet in here. The cabin is so well insulated. The glass is double thick, so you just don't get interrupted by the outside world. Okay, so now that we're over that, I just wanted to point out this car is just completely silent. It floats along. In fact, I want to go so far as to say that the G90 feels more like my grandmother used to own a Lexus LS 430, a 2001 model. This reminds me more of that than the current Lexus LS does. And I do mean that in a good way. It's floaty in a way that old Japanese cars used to be, and German sedans of this segment just really aren't anymore. We're going over some cobblestones now, and I just can't even feel them. The adaptive suspension just kind of takes care of everything. It's a little soft and a little mushy. I would say that the new LS 500 is a little bit more engaging to drive than this, but the chassis is quite good, and when you do take it through some bends, which I'm doing now, it doesn't completely fall flat on its face. Now, there are two engine options you can get here. We have the base engine, if you want to call it that. It's a 3.3 liter twin turbocharged V6. You can find this in other Genesis models, including the G70 and the G80. It produces a healthy amount of horsepower, 365 and 376 pound-feet of torque. That's going to get you up to 60 miles per hour in 5.3 seconds, which is not slow by any stretch. And if I go ahead and floor it here, plenty of responsiveness. The turbos spool up pretty quick. The 8-speed automatic transmission downshifts very quickly, and there's no problems with performance. The engine sounds pretty good as well. Your MPG figures, they're not going to be great for a car that's this big and this heavy, but you're still going to get 17 MPG in the city, about 25 MPG on the highway, and about 20 combined. I've averaged right a little bit above 20, so I can definitely see that being true when you drive this car out in the real world. And interestingly enough, we have a rear wheel drive model. You can get all-wheel drive as well, so if you're going to be driving this in a snowy climate, you don't get hurt in fuel economy even if you get the all-wheel drive. That's pretty interesting as well. And pricing for this model that we have here is $72,200 to start. We're in what is essentially the base model, $2,200 extra if you want the all-wheel drive. So that's going to bring it up to $74,700. Now, there's also the 5.0 Ultimate model, which gets you a 5-liter V8 engine. That's the bigger motor, 420 horsepower and 383 pound-feet of torque. So a sizable amount more than what this V6 produces. However, 0 to 60 is going to remain the same at 5.3 seconds. I'm assuming that's because the V8 is a little bit heavier. Now, the V8 sounds a little bit better than this, but in terms of performance, you're not really going to see too much of a benefit. That can also be rear or all-wheel drive. Now, the reason why I might recommend the V8 isn't really for performance, although the sound is probably really good coming from that V8. It's because it only costs just a little bit more. It's $75,700 to start, and you can get all-wheel drive on it for $78,200. Now, you do get some other things as part of that V8 package that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But the driving experience doesn't change too much depending on the engine. Steering is very light, but I think it provides plenty of feedback. We've got these drive modes here. I have it now in comfort. I'm going to go ahead and put it in sport. So that's going to pump in a little bit more engine noise than what we had before. So if I go ahead and put my foot on the throttle, you get just a little bit more responsiveness. The steering tightens up a little bit. And now the steering actually feels quite nice, although the suspension is still quite floaty. This car does transform a little bit when you put it in sport mode. It also has an eco mode and a custom mode so that you can kind of set it up the way you like it. And what's interesting is when you put it in sport mode, these bolsters on the seats here will actually tighten up to make you feel like you're driving just a bit more aggressively. We've got all of the safety functions that you could possibly want here. We've got this amazing lane change camera. Every time I signal, it's going to pull up a camera showing me my blind spot. Of course, we have adaptive cruise control. We have lane keep assist. We have lane follow assist. So if I go ahead and put on the cruise control, of course, I can pretty much take my hands off the wheel and let it do itself, although this is not a self-driving system, so it is going to ask me to intervene with the steering. But in terms of semi-autonomous tech, this is one of the best vehicles I've tested. And looking at the pricing, about $72,000 to $78,000, under $80,000, no matter how you configure it, you may think that Genesis has cut corners on the inside. But that's just not the case. So we're gonna pull over so that I can show you the amazing interior of this 2020 G90. So like I said while we were out driving, Genesis has not really cut corners here on the interior because this is the quote unquote cheap base model, and yet we have pretty much every option that you could ever want. All of the leather surfaces, those are Nappa leather surfaces. They are really soft. The steering wheel is a bit basic, but it is really soft to the touch. I love how this feels. You have these really nice solid stitching. This feels very Audi-like in execution. You've got this quilted leather here on the seats with this white piping. I think it changes a little bit if you get the tan interior. I think it maybe goes to black piping. I kind of like how the tan looks, but this black is certainly lovely as well. All of these surfaces, this shifter, definitely Audi inspired not in a bad way. Very Germanic feel here. Now, all G90s are going to get this updated infotainment system with this large widescreen display. You can control it one of two ways. You've got a rotating controller here. It kind of reminds me of Mercedes command system, although it's a little bit easier to use than that. It rotates, or you can bump up, down, left, and right to get to stuff. You have this row of menu items. Here's your favorite 3 items here. But if that is just a little bit too complicated, you can also touch the screen, which is just a little bit easier. In here, you have your wireless charger. You also have a USB. So if I go ahead and plug in my Android device, I'm gonna get Android Auto up on the screen. It'll take a moment to connect, and then I go over here to Android Auto to activate it. Now, the one thing I wanted to point out with Android Auto here on this G90 is that it is a widescreen, but it doesn't take up the entire display, which is a little bit annoying. You see it just says Android Auto on my Pixel 3a XL, which is a little bit annoying. I wish it would go widescreen. Not all cars are able to do that just yet. Here's our shifter. You push this little side button that will put us into drive. As you can see, we have our 360-degree camera, super high resolution, super high quality. I can even change the camera angles if I'm parallel parking or if I don't want to get too close to something. This camera system is absolutely fantastic. Super great there. We have heated and ventilated seats, heated steering wheel. Everything is super luxurious. And we have our wood trim here, which is absolutely amazing as well. It's open pore, so it really does feel like the real stuff. Now, if there's one complaint I have about this interior, it's the gauge clusters. The gauges are just really boring. They're black with black dials with white numbering. They kind of look like they came out of an Elantra. So those are just a little bit cheap compared to the rest of the interior, although we do have that nice camera system that'll show you the lane changes. I like how Kia has done it on the K900 just a little bit better. That's an all digital display, and it'll take over the tack circle, which just looks a little bit cooler. And the other one complaint, it's a minor one. These buttons, they're kind of metallic finished, but they are plastic, and they just don't match up with some of the other nice materials in here. Now, it is really nice to drive this car, as I showed you, but the premier place to sit is going to be in the back seat. So let's go ahead and check that out. All right, now as I hop into the back seat, obviously let the door soft close. I'll show you how much legroom I have here. It's just under 38 inches of legroom, but I have the passenger seat here positioned up forward, so I have a little bit more for filming, and I can get even more if I pull down this little center armrest here. I can actually slide this rear seat. See how it comes into frame here? I can actually control the front of it as well. And just like my grandmother's old Lexus LS 430, it actually has controls built in here on the seat. I used to play with that as a kid nonstop, so if you have little kids, they might want to play with this. So that's a little bit annoying, but this is more of an executive limo. So back here, we do have a controller that matches the controller found up there on the infotainment system, but it doesn't control all of it. You can control your radio. I've got FM, AM, Sirius XM media controls here, so I can control all of that here. I also have my temperature controller, so I can turn the fans back here up and down, and I can also control the temperature back here. It's pretty fully loaded back here. We've got heated seats on both of these seats. Now, if you get the V8 model, you also get ventilated seats back here, and then these seats also become powered. Not sure why Genesis doesn't let you do that on the V6 model. Really wish they could, but that's one reason why I recommend getting the V8. You also get two entertainment screens on the backs here, so your kids can watch movies and whatever. So yeah, just another reason to get the V8, but even if you don't, you do get sunshades here. The controls for those are here on the doors, or if I push this here, I can get my rear sunshade up, so it will cocoon you away from the sun. Now that we've checked out the back seat, let's go ahead and check out the trunk space. So coming around to the G90's trunk, if I stand here with the key in hand, it will beep a couple of times before opening up the trunk automatically. That's handy if you have like heavy grocery bags in your hands and can't access the button for it. That's going to reveal 15.7 cubic feet of storage, which is pretty large. I think you could fit plenty of stuff in here. It's not quite as large as the Audi A8 or the BMW 7 Series. Of course, we have a soft close as well. And if you don't have the key or you have that function off, there is a hidden button to open up the trunk right here. Now let's sum up our time with the Genesis G90. So that was the 2020 Genesis G90. I absolutely think this is an outstanding effort from a company that is trying to make a name for itself. You may want to bemoan Genesis as just a fancy Hyundai, but I think if you do that, you're missing out on so much more. You're probably one of those people that said a Lexus would never be anything other than a fancy Toyota. Well, look at where Lexus is now. This has all of the right pieces. It's got great powertrains, a wonderful interior, and it rides more like my grandmother's Lexus LS430 than the current Lexus LS does. Honestly, I wish that the LS500 was a little bit more like this car. And starting at the low $70,000 range, it's an absolute bargain compared to its European and other Asian competitors. That is why the Genesis G90 is going to earn a CarBuzz score of must buy. I absolutely love it, and I can't wait to see more of these out on the road.